All right, guys, so it is time to talk about sustainable agriculture. So let's jump right in and talk about the differences between sustainable agriculture and what we think of as industrial or conventional agriculture. So if we can pull it up, sorry. Okay, so sustainable agriculture or a more traditional form, quite honestly, of agriculture than what came about with the Green Revolution. So, what does it involve and what is its goal? So, sustainable agriculture, its goal is to feed the world's population without destroying the land, without damaging the environment, and without reducing biodiversity. In fact, part of the goal of sustainable agriculture is to increase biodiversity. We're trying to do all of that while fulfilling the needs of the world's population for food and fiber, trying to enhance soil quality, again, looking to build that biodiversity and improve the environment, trying to minimize use of non renewable resources, so things like fossil fuels. And also, and number one for the farmers themselves, is economic viability. Sustainable agriculture is almost always going to require more labor and it is going to require more skilled labor. So, one of the primary goals of sustainable agriculture is soil conservation. So, keeping that soil in place, preventing erosion. And one of the ways that sustainable agriculture does that is a process called contour plowing, where you plow and harvest along the contours of the land. And again, you might remember seeing some of this in the Biggest Little Farm. So you're following the contours of the land, not necessarily just making nice, clean squares or perfect circles. Another way of preventing soil erosion is creating windbreaks. And you see these in older areas where there was lots of farming. You'll see lines of trees planted between fields. And the goal of those is to reduce the wind in order to hold the soil in place. Another way that soil is prevented from eroding is by the planting of perennial crops because these grow over and over again. We can remember perennial starts with a P, like permanent. So these grow every year. They frequently stay on the ground all year. They don't require plowing, which helps to decrease erosion. And then terracing. So if you have an area that is too steep for contour plowing, you create terraces. So you create wide steps on a slope that are able to hold water and therefore reduce erosion. One of our big tools in preventing soil erosion is no-till agriculture. So with no-till agriculture, as we've talked about before, you simply cut down the previous harvest whatever crop it was, and then replant in that same place by creating a slit and putting the seeds in it, but not plowing up the field. And so this helps to prevent soil erosion because it doesn't loosen the soil when it turns it. And it also adds organic material because as the previous crop decays and decomposes in that soil space, it prevents the growth of weeds and it also adds back organic matter to the soil. And then we have strip cropping. In strip cropping, we plant 2 or more crops together that work synergistically. So if you guys remember your early American history, you might remember that the Native Americans taught the settlers to plant the 3 sisters, which was corn, beans, and squash. And so much in the same way, we do strip cropping now. You plant 2 crops together. We also call this intercropping. That works synergistically. So corn requires a lot of nitrogen. You plant it with peas or beans, both of which have root rhizomes that fix nitrogen. And we can consider this a form of green fertilizer where one plant is actually providing the nutrients that the other plant needs. When we talk about the 3 sisters, the squash had the added benefit of shading out any competing weeds. So back to much more traditional forms of farming. So one goal of sustainable farming is conserving soil. And then another goal of sustainable farming is actually improving soil fertility. And so through crop rotation, by planting crops in a particular order, first the legumes that you see there, those are nitrogen fixing plants. So the next you plant a root vegetable that is going to consume a lot of that nitrogen, but is going to aerate the soil and make it a little bit more open. And then you plant fruiting plants, so things like cucumbers, tomatoes, squash, peppers, that are going to shade the soil and cool the soil. And finally, you finish with leafy plants, which consume a lot of nitrogen. And then you start over again with the legumes. And so on a 4-year rotation, you're able to prepare the soil for each crop in succession. Another way that we can promote soil fertility is using organic fertilizers, using animal and plant waste as fertilizer instead of synthetic fertilizers, composting and using worm castings. All of those are considered green manure. Okay. When we have issues with the pH of soil, we can use limestone, or frequently just called lime, in order to neutralize acidic soil. We remember when we learned about soils that we want soils that are slightly basic because they help with that cation exchange capacity. It makes it easier for the plants to uptake the nutrients that they need out of the soil. Okay, and another way of promoting, or a third goal of sustainable agriculture, is rotational grazing. And in rotational grazing, you actually move livestock from one area to another in order to, and you move them after about 70% of the grazing material has been grazed. So you move them over a course of about 25 to 30 days. You move them from one area to the next. And so that by the time you get back to the first one, it has had time to regenerate. And what this does is that it allows the soil to recover. It allows the plants to build deeper root systems, and it means healthier livestock because they're not in the same area over and over again. So those are three main components of sustainable agriculture: preventing soil erosion, improving soil fertility, and protecting soil through rotational grazing. One of the things you hear about a lot when we talk about sustainable agriculture is organic agriculture. They're not synonymous, but certainly they are related. So organic agriculture specifically uses no synthetic pesticides, no synthetic fertilizers. And there are very strict regulations about what can be labeled as organic. It cannot use synthetic pesticides, cannot use fertilizers. The labor costs associated with this are significantly higher, but it allows farmers to sell their foods at a premium price. And so it frequently comes out well financially for farmers. It is expensive initially to switch and can take a few years for that financial payoff. And organic is growing incredibly fast. This is a little bit dated. I think this is from 2018. So sales growth has skyrocketed, and you're starting to see it as much more part of the mainstream food market. So that's it for sustainable agriculture. If you have questions, just let me know.